Up next, the Authentically Detroit Book Club meets at Next Chapter Books to discuss The Reformatory by award-winning author Tananarive Due. But first, this week's hot takes from the Detroit Free Press. Detroit police announced block party crackdown after shooting that kills 2 and injures 19. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show. Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Next Chapter Books on East Warren. We are a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Davidson.
And we want to thank you so much for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. Welcome to our second of 3 live podcasts this week. It's been already a busy week, and it's only Tuesday, Donna Davidson.
Well, you know, since I love talking, it's been good.
I think you and I both love talking. You know, I actually am a communicator for a living. So
Right.
there we go. We are excited to be back at Next Chapter Books, this time to discuss the latest novel by award-winning author Tananarive Due, The Reformatory. Welcome to Authentically Detroit, everybody. We're so happy that you are here. Donna, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm doing well.
Yeah. It's the second day of the week.
It
the
is.
second recording of 3.
It is.
I'm excited.
I am too.
You know, I think we could talk to trees and they'll talk back to us. Because,
know.
I mean, we just love conversation.
Yes,
Good
we do.
conversation.
But, you know, I want to say this. Throughout my life, books have always been something that I have loved. One of my nicknames when I was growing up is Reader. I started reading when I was 3 years old, and I have read to escape family trauma. I've read to escape marriage trauma. I've read to learn. And so being in a bookstore is always my happy place, and I'm so happy that Next Chapter Books is here on the east side of Detroit.
Thanks, Jay and Sarah.
I remember when bookstores just went away. You know, it used to be something I do. I just go and I look at the tables and try to figure out which books I was going to read. And coming here and reading these books I've actually started purchasing hardcover books again, or, you know, just actual physical books. Well, you know, I have.
Yeah,
and, you know, you remember the joy of reading, and it's like, you know what? I actually made a mistake and brought my book light with me, so you can know I'm telling the truth, but I actually have been reading a lot of books. So it's great being here, and we really appreciate Jay and Sarah for inviting us into their home to do this.
And you know, for me, it is something about like holding the book and feeling it and the pages and reading it.
And smelling it, right?
And smelling it, but also treating it with like the utmost respect. Like the book itself is a gift. This is somebody's imagination manifested, right? And, you know, I feel like it deserves the utmost respect. I, like you, was an avid reader, reading chapter books. I think I was in Stony Arts Bank in Chicago, meeting with the Astorgates. And one of the quotes by some author in his space was, when a bookworm lives 1,000 lives.
That's right. That's
right. Or something like that.
And you travel everywhere, right?
And you travel everywhere. Yes. And so we've traveled to the mystical but fake land of Gracetown. with the Reformatory, and I cannot wait to talk about it. So
Yes.
I'm really, really excited. But we do have some hot takes that we want to talk about today. One hot take, I think, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right. So for hot takes, it's where we run down some of the week's top headlines in the city of Detroit. And this is the top headline. For hot takes, Detroit police announced block party crackdown after shooting that kills 2 and injures 19 by Andrea Sahari at the Detroit Free Press. Detroit police will now respond to incidents at block parties as Priority 1 calls in the aftermath of the mass shooting on the city's east side, where 2 people were killed and 19 others injured. Police consider Priority 1 calls life-threatening incidents and respond faster. The city also announced Monday that it created an 80-officer unit dedicated to preventing safety threats that stem from illegal block parties. Neighborhood response teams will be sent out to every precinct starting this weekend, according to city officials. Detroit police say they have already taken some actions to crack down on unlawful block parties during the summer months. Authorities intend to prosecute the host of the parties and the property owners, officials said Monday. Over 100 shell casings were found at the scene of the mass shooting, Detroit Police Chief James White said at a Monday news conference. He confirmed there were multiple shooters but did not provide further details. No suspects are in custody, police said. White said 9 guns were recovered at the scene. 1 had a Glock switch, rendering the weapon automatic. The victims included a 20-year-old woman and a 21-year-old male who were both killed. A 17-year-old remains in critical condition. The ages of the victims range from 17 to 27, according to Detroit police. Both Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan and White said unlawful block parties are becoming increasingly violent, holding neighborhoods hostage. And that's a quote. Here's the rest of the quote. We had a level of violence last week that we rarely see anymore in Detroit, Duggan said, and it's caused a great deal of pain for the victims and their families, and it's caused a great deal of pain to the entire Detroit community. But what's especially troubling is that the violence was generated almost entirely by a growing form of illegal activity in the city, and that is the illegal block party. I have so much to say about this, but Donna, what say you?
I'm horrified by the city's response. We don't have recreation centers that are open in most neighborhoods. We don't have a lot of activities for children that used to exist when I was a kid. And these are young people who are gathering, and they're calling that a block party. Like, I've been to block parties, right? Block party is where the street is closed off, and, you know, you go from door to door, and people are serving food in the middle of the street. This is not a block party. This is young people congregating on a block, which is different than a block party.
I'm really glad that you make that distinction, because I am really peeved by the language that is coming out of the mayor's office talking about illegal block parties. It's either a block party or it's not.
and the criminalizing of public space and now private space. It's now a criminal act to have too many people come over your house. I would not have survived. I probably would have survived, but I would not have had as much fun as I did in the 1970s if I was not going to various parties in people's backyards. I'm going to be real, okay? And I didn't. Okay, it's a true story. When I was a kid, teenager, I liked to party. I liked to party in people's backyards. I loved all funk music, Parliament, Funkadelic, you know. Chaka Khan. Oh, my goodness. The Isley Brothers, Evelyn Champagne King. I could go on. The Brothers Johnson. And in the summer months, you would catch me in somebody's backyard if I was lucky. Usually what had happened is a friend would pick me up, and they say, I heard there's a party on this street, and we go to that street. If that party was lame, we just go to another party. So my cousin's parents were a little bit more protective than mine. And they said, well, you can't go to parties without invitations. So my cousin and I started making our own invitations. So one day, our friends picked us up. They took us to a party around the block from my cousin's house. I don't know who lived in the house. I don't know. We were just back in the backyard dancing. And somehow up front in the house, there were people out there, and somebody had a gun. Okay? So they called my aunt. They called my aunt and uncle and said, hey, Carmen and Donna are in the backyard around here, and there's people shooting in the front yard. So my aunt comes. My aunt is Guatemalan. She's has a very heavy accent. She's wearing bunny slippers and a house dress, and she walks back there, and she catches myself and my cousin doing the freak in the backyard in a house around the block from her. Let's just say she was appalled. but I was a kid and I enjoyed my childhood. And I think that children should be able to have enjoyable childhoods. Everybody did not enjoy backyard parties like me. It was a privilege because Detroit has a lot of yards, right? But now we have a mayor who didn't grow up here, who has none of this history, who doesn't know any of the people and really does not understand the culture, using terms like illegal block parties to describe people, inviting people to their homes, and is talking about charging property owners with criminal acts if too many people show up at their homes. And that's what he's really talking about. If the party spills out front, you don't want that kind of activity. Nobody wants to see kids shot. Nobody wanted to see people at the water park in Rochester Hills shot. Nobody wanted to see the people in Lathrop Village shot at a pool party. And nobody wanted to see people shot in Las Vegas a few years ago where 50 people were killed, where a gunman was there. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't criminalize the people for hanging out, and they didn't have new the water park is open, the pool is open, and Las Vegas is open for business and was open for business as soon as they got rid of the carnage. We are reacting in a way that makes sense if what you think about Black youth is that they are dangerous, or Black people is that they are dangerous, and it's too dangerous for them to be around each other. The final thing I want to say is there have been shootings in Hart Plaza. There have been shootings downtown. There have been shootings in Gracetown. But Gracetown is open for business. Hart Plaza is open for business. I say, how can we police and protect this area better? I want to know why the police need to have special codes to respond to people calling the police and saying there's violence happening here. And the last thing I want to say is last year, there were calls. Last year, just under a year ago, an armed gunman accelerated into the Stoudemire Wellness Hub that was occupied at the time, and the police department was down the street, didn't show up for 15 to 20 minutes. He was disarmed by an employee. And when the police came, they didn't even handcuff the man. They took him to the hospital because he said his head hurt. And then said, he was just drunk driving, and minimized the crime. So it's very interesting to me, the selective outrage of the police, because the police never became outraged at the fact that this armed gunman was driving full speed into an occupied building. And by the way, he was not a Black gunman driving full speed into our building. It was a white man. And so this presumption of he probably didn't mean it sits with him. The final thing I want to say is they recovered 9 guns. The suggestion almost is like these people were shooting at each other. Is there any evidence that the 19 people who are in the hospital were involved in shooting, or is there more evidence that some people came from outside and shot at the party? I don't know. But without knowing who the suspects are, we're jumping to a whole lot of conclusions. This could have been gang violence. This could have been people coming into a community and just assaulting the community and victimizing all of these young people who were gathered to have fun.
I have to say I'm really perplexed and confused as to the response being, reiterating the city code and rules around block parties, because again, I just want to emphasize that's not what that was. Right. It was a party that spilled into or onto the block and onto the street. And so it really is, it feels like a manipulation of a comm strategy to try to get us thinking about something that isn't relevant to the issue that we are discussing. The other thing that I would say to feed off the point that you are making is that in other mass shootings, we rarely see victims criminalized. We rarely see victims policed to the point where if they are in such a space again that it would be a crime. What we do not see, and the complexity that I do not see on part of the press, the rigor that I do not see on part of our government, our mayor, our chief of police, is, in these mass shootings that happen, they're typically by white men. There's always this analysis of psychology and upbringing and mental well-being and wellness, right? There is this proclivity and ability for law enforcement and government to try to look at root causes as to why someone will behave that way without making presumptions, right? What we have here is the antithesis of that. There's no rigor around understanding the complexity or the mental nuances as to why something like this is happening on a block in the city of Detroit. There is the assumption that Black people don't know how to act when they gather, and when they gather, violence is inevitable, and we have to protect them from themselves. It's the same logic that's used that closed all of the East Side riverfront parks around the fireworks. When I've never read a story about an incident fireworks night at the neighborhood parks, but only incidents happening in the downtown main viewing area. And so this feels really, really off to me. I don't know what the logic is behind the comm strategy, especially this language is deliberate, and it is deliberate for a reason. Illegal block parties. That's not, right. I've never heard that before. It feels icky to me.
It feels icky because it is icky. And what it will lead, first of all, do we even trust the police to enforce this fairly and consistently when there have been so many bad takes on policing over the past few years? I'm devastated by this, and it just reminds me of the need for a Black Detroit Democracy Project or something where people can be spoken to. We know the kinds of things that reduce crime. For example, we know that investing in the kind of work that Force Detroit does, the
CVI.
CVI.
Mm-hmm. Criminal violence intervention.
Thank you. Yeah. Criminal violence intervention works. We know because it's worked in other cities. It's worked in Boston, which started the 10-point plan, which actually brought gun violence to a halt because what they invested in is the community support systems to help intervene. When there's going to be some kind of conflict.
That is what Teferi Brent was saying in that press conference. And he preached it.
Oh, he did. Let me say this. I don't always compliment Teferi Brent, but Teferi, I was like, quotable,
and we love him, and he loves you.
I do. Yeah. But, sometimes we stand on different sides of issues because we're very passionate people, right?
Yes.
But let me say this. Teferi was 100% right on in that moment. Criminalizing block clubs, criminalizing block club captains, criminalizing blocks and property owners is not going to fix what's wrong with gun violence in Detroit. There's a root cause, and we're not talking about it. And most Detroiters are not violent. Most Detroiters are not bad. All the backyard parties I went to, and I want to point this out, in the 1970s, the murder rate was not better than it is today. In 1970s, the murder rate in Detroit was off the chain, okay? We had all kinds of gangs. We had the Errol Flynns. We had the Sconies.
YBI.
We had YBI was after that.
Oh, okay.
YBI, that was after that. They didn't exist. At that time, keep in mind, Detroit was very different. YBI came with crack, and that came in when 80s. Crack was king in the 80s. But when I was a kid, really what you had is these street gangs. And they got into all kinds of fights. The Flynns, you could Flynn, and there was a whole dance. Like, the Crip Walk, Flynning was a dance in Detroit. And so I'm saying that to say that it was not less violent. I'm saying that to say that despite it not being less violent, there are people all over the place who partied in backyards. And I only one time encountered the perception of gun violence. I don't know if a bullet ever went out of that gun, but I was told that, there was shots. So we need to trust that good people can congregate and let them congregate as opposed to increasing police oversight, because the criminals who are bringing those guns and shooting, they don't care about those rules.
They'll do it in the daytime.
They'll do it in daytime. They don't care about that. Yeah. The people who are going to be harmed are the innocent people who live on the blocks who really need outlets for their kind of joy.
Yeah. Oh, for that outlets for that kind of joy. Thank you for that. And listen, if you have stories that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with the book club discussion of The Reformatory. We're so excited.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, By Detroiters, for Detroiters.
Have you always dreamed of being on the airwaves? Well, the Detroit Eastside Engaged Podcast Network, or DEEP for short, is here to make that dream a reality. Located inside the Stoudemire, the DEEP Network offers studio space and production staff to help get your podcast idea off the ground. Doesn't take a whole lot of work to get started. Just visit the Authentically Detroit page at ecn-detroit.org or call Sarah at 313-948-0344.
Welcome back, everyone. We are at Next Chapter Books discussing The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I said her name right.
A few times in a row. I'm so proud of you.
Look at me. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author who teaches Black Horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer, Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stephens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights.
Yeah. I love Tananarive Due.
You got stuff to read on the script. Where your script at?
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's
I'm
all right.
supposed to read
Due's
stuff
latest
on
novel,
the script.
The Reformatory, is a gripping page-turning novel set in Jim Crow, Florida. 12-year-old Robbie Stephens Jr. is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, a reformatory, for kicking the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister, Gloria. So begins Robbie's journey further into the terrors of the Jim Crow South and the very real horror of the school they call the Reformatory. The Reformatory is a haunting work of historical fiction written as only Tananarive Due could, by piecing together the life of the relative her family never spoke of and bringing his tragedy and those of so many others at the infamous Dozier School for Boys to the light in this riveting novel. And riveting is the key word,
Yes.
Donna Givens-Davison.
Yes. I encountered Tananarive Due the first time about 20 years ago at Borders Bookshop. I had just happened to pick up a book.
Borders?
Remember Borders?
What a timestamp.
There was a book called The Living Blood, and it was a horror novel about immortals, and it was so gripping and so compelling, because what she does is she uses her literature, like so many great writers, to raise additional questions, not just what is the plot of this novel, but the meaning of things well beyond the novel. And so the meaning of life and death, what does love mean? I mean, the books were so brilliant. What does afterlife? Well, in this instance, what does immortal life look like? And what if we want to live forever, but is that really a good thing? And what is the pain of living forever if you're an immortal and nobody else is? Those are some of the questions that were answered. And I'm telling you, that book took me by a storm. It's a series of books called the Immortal series. And so she became one of my favorite writers. And I'm not normally a horror fiction fan. But like this book, The Reformatory it's a thriller. Uses horror to tell stories that people really need to understand.
I think, but you know what? I think some of the plot, some of what happens in the book is horrific, but it doesn't read like a horror genre.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that's exactly how her immortal stories. In fact, the supernatural part of the story was not really the horror story.
Yeah.
It's the history that's horrible.
It's the history and
that
the
got
actions on part of white folks in power in
Yes.
Gracetown and at the Reformatory. Like the warden was, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I mean, just a monster. But Tananarive does such an amazing job of painting a picture of these characters and their proclivities and their outputs, so much so that I can literally visualize it. Like I can see the warden, I can see Robbie, I can see Redbone.
And she also does a pretty good job of helping you understand why the warden is the warden.
Absolutely.
So you're not just reading it and thinking, okay, this is just this monster that got made. This is a person who is indeed, living through some pretty monstrous experiences and exposed, and the cultural inputs into that monstrosity of a warden. It's not even that unusual. It's happened since. It happened in real life.
Happening now.
It happens right now. Prison wardens, we've had how many people
with absolute power,
with absolute
no check.
power. You're God. When somebody goes to prison, nobody's eyes are there. You can go and you can visit after going through all kinds of stuff, but there's no real eyes. There's a TV series. I'm trying to think of the name of the TV series that's based in Michigan about a prison, and I won't think of it while we're here, but I'll try to remind you of it later. It's really, really good, but it's hard to watch because it takes you inside this prison culture and the whole town culture around those prisons, and you can see.
And I want to do a lot of investigative reporting around that, especially I call them prison economies. There are whole communities in the state of Michigan whose economy is completely dependent on the functionality of the prison.
That's interesting because I was just in Idlewild, Michigan, where I used to go as a child. And as we drove up to Idlewild, it was different, right? First of all, no farms. We didn't pass a single farm, maybe one farm. So it's like, where did the farms go? The second thing is, where did the farm stands go? The third thing is, why do they have all of these Dollar Generals? My goodness, who's eating real food? And the fourth thing is the economy. Where do people work, right? So work has disappeared. And now the biggest game in town is a prison. And it changes the relationship of the people in that town to Black people who live nearby, whether or not they're part of that or not. And certainly, to other people outside of that area. So it creates these insular kind of criminal communities. And you see that here. But the way the book starts, I want to get
just to that point. We could go back to where it starts, but you're talking about the people who get caught up in its economy and all of that. It reminds me of a line in the book that Redbone said to Lil Robbie. He said, "They may seem good, but nobody stays good. Nobody stays good." That part just it broke my heart. But go ahead. You were getting ready to go to the beginning.
Well, I wanted to go to the beginning of the book because it's there were so many things that happened there. You have this little Black boy in a southern racist town who loses his mother, whose father has to go hide from the family, right? And his sister not really knowing how to manage all of this because they're left with a senior citizen. The father had to flee because of false charges against him because he would have been killed and not been given any kind of free or fair prison trial. But anyway, the father's gone, the mother's gone, and there's nobody there to teach this little boy something that was really startling to you. And I want you to talk about your shock at reading this when you first read the book and what it brought to mind.
I mean, the first thing that I would say that I feel like the book is filled with many climactic points. Like Tananarive gives us moments of gasp pretty often. And in the first chapter, I'm hooked, right? Because we learned that Gloria and Robbie's dad had to flee. We don't necessarily know why yet in the first chapter. And we also know that their mother is dead. Why? Because in chapter 1, we see Robbie having a conversation or a vision of his mom's ghost, this loving vision of his mother's ghost. And I'm like, oh my God, we got ghosts in the first chapter. We got a fleeing father in the first chapter. And then we have this relationship of brother and sister, but really like older sisters / mom trying to figure out how to take care of this growing boy with a mind of his own, but also a body of his own. What Tananarive does really well is describe just the body condition that Rob had to contend with throughout the entire book. His hunger, right? His hunger pains, being lashed, right, being attacked by one of the McCormicks, and then the dad. So they're walking down this road, and Lyle McCormick, whom they grew up with, but it's interesting, right? Because Tananarive so eloquently made this point, is like you grew up playing with these white kids, and then at a certain age there is a separation because they're no longer your peer. They become something higher than you, and you have to, submit and kowtow to that. And so Lyle and Gloria particularly grew up together, and Lyle is sweet on Gloria and doesn't know how to express it other than being overly aggressive to the point that Gloria's little brother is triggered, right?
Well, he's triggered because his father told him before he left, make sure you don't whistle at a white girl.
Yeah.
And again, he's not certain. He doesn't really understand yet what it means to be Black.
Yeah, he's 12 years old.
So he's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If you don't whistle at a white girl, you don't whistle at a Black girl. And this man just compared my sister to, a prostitute. How dare you? And so he does to this boy.
Touching on her and grabbing her.
Touching on her and grabbing on her. And I'm going to say, it's not that he liked her, right? It's that he liked her in the way that white men like black girls in the South.
Power.
And that is, well, not just power. It is this privilege that I can touch you, I can do what I want to you, and I don't have to show respect to you. He never would have treated a white girl in that way, but this mindset that you are mine for the taking. And I see you as being less human than white girls, and therefore it's this, he's slowly learning also, just as Robbie's learning to be black. Lila's learning what it means to be a white man and to dehumanize the white women. And both of them are learning those lessons, that their position, because, the little kids don't know it, but as they grow, they start to learn, wait a minute, I can like her and do something. And then you remember how his father responded. He said, you like her? He kind of, why would you do anything for her? He couldn't understand why he actually, at some level, cared about her, even though she was not wifey material. Yeah. Even though she was not somebody he could parade as a girlfriend, he had some feelings for her. The conditioning that he was under, in 5 years, he would have no feeling towards treating a black woman that way.
Yeah.
But he was still new to this, and so was Robbie.
Yeah.
And they were learning their roles.
And so was Gloria.
Right?
And I think Tananarive does a great job of holding up a mirror to what was really happening at the time. I mean, it's fiction, but the proclivities of a lot of these characters is historically accurate, right? Is what you said. I think also the lack of parental figures in the story and comfort sends so many racing thoughts through the minds of Gloria and Robbie as to what they're going to do next and how they should feel, and their reference point based upon how they should feel, going back to what mama taught them years ago or what dad said when he was here, but nothing actively
there's
guiding and parenting
nobody
them.
is present to really help guide them and teach them how to assimilate into their roles. And it's really tragic that a little boy has to learn that he is so inferior that he cannot fight back. And it's really tragic that a little boy, that a young man has to learn that he can treat people any way that he wants, these people any way that he wants. This is the, tragedy of racism, is that people, and it's always learned behavior. It's never something that people are born into. It's learned behavior. It's cast. It's the roles that people are given. I think the other thing that's interesting is the absence of a protective father. I was just visiting my husband Kevin's family in Orlando, Florida. And so Kevin was asking about his grandfather. And his grandfather's name was Shark. His nickname was Shark. And everybody describes him as mean, right? And so he says, well, tell me about him other than the fact that he was mean. And they said, well, listen, nobody ever messed with Dad. When we went to the store, we might stand somewhere and people would say, no, them Shark's kids, daughters, you leave them alone. And so these young black girls growing up in a sharecropping community in Fort Deposit, Alabama, felt protected by the presence of the father, who was also somebody who they were afraid of, right? And I thought, what a privilege to be protected in that day and time, in that space. This father, who they missed, was a person who refused to accept his place, who fought back and was a protector. They didn't just lose somebody to teach them. They lost somebody to protect them. If his father had been home, perhaps Robbie could have gone to Dad and said, Dad, I don't like what they did. But Robbie was protecting his sister, Gloria, and Gloria was protecting Robbie, and neither of them had the standing to protect each other.
And, because of the unwillingness to bow on part of Robert Sr., right? This situation opened up a road to where everybody, the white power structure in Gracetown and in the state of Florida, can retaliate on Robert Sr. by terrorizing and locking up and setting afire his children.
Yeah. And the other thing about this book that I think is interesting is that the terror was not just directed at these children.
Yeah.
And the terror was not just directed at black people. There was a social worker who came from New York, the caseworker who came from New York.
Loman.
And he wanted to do the right thing.
A Jewish guy
who was also persecuted for being Jewish, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to fit in. He's trying to figure out, how do I exist here? He wants to save him, but he's afraid. There's, the people who are organizing to try to get an attorney there, and some black people are going to stick their necks out, and some of them aren't going to stick their necks out. There's a culture of fear and control over everybody, over white women remember the father was accused by a white woman, and the white woman knew it was a lie.
Yes.
But she was afraid of telling the truth. And so these caste systems create this culture of fear where everybody has to function within their place in society. Nobody gets to step out of line. And if you do,
That's what I was going to ask you. What happens if you do? What happens if that white woman who accused Robert Sr. said, "Nah, it was my crazy boyfriend who had been beating me up"? What happens to her if she had spoken the truth?
Really bad things. Like I watched this documentary about Lowndes County, Alabama.
I love that doc.
Wasn't it great?
It was so good.
Do you remember the part in the documentary where a priest who was helping black kids helping them, try to vote and helping them in their protest? You remember what happened to him? He was killed in broad daylight by a store owner. And this is not fiction. This is reality. Because it was even worse to be a lover of the N-word than it was to be an N-word. That was a betrayal of your class, of your people, and you better not betray your people. There were people of all different backgrounds who were killed in the fight for civil rights because nobody is supposed to be fighting for these people. It's important, I think, for us to remember that because sometimes we forget that these cultures, they're right now, and compared to right now, there's people right now, 2024, who are terrified of another Donald Trump presidency, who live in a neighborhood where putting up a Biden sign will cause them great grievous harm. There's people right now who are afraid of standing against certain things and speaking their mind because there's still a price to pay when you're seen as a traitor to your people. And it's the caste system and it's the hoarding and protection of economic privilege and other types of privileges that are really at stake undergirding all of this, but it shows up with these boys.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the thematic elements of the book to sort of lay the groundwork for the rest of the conversation. So there is the element of a very palpable supernatural piece, right? That we see in chapter 1 with the spirit of Robbie and Gloria's mom, but also there's this word around Gracetown that Gracetown is, pretty much haunted with. They use the word haints, right, as well as the Reformatory, and I want to get into that. But there's also this element of history and a little bit of retelling of real history in this work of fiction. And she talks about the work of the NAACP at the time and the deification almost of a young Thurgood Marshall who had been arguing cases on behalf of the NAACP, right? There is this reference to sundown towns, places where black folk ought not to be caught in after the sun goes down. But I also think that there is this really, really I would say just eye-opening prose that takes us into the minds and the spirits of these beloved characters. I fell in love with all these characters, even the ones I didn't like, because she was really able to provide contextualization as to how these people got to the point that they were at.
I think that's super important.
Yeah.
I think she does a great job with that. What I love is the little kids can see the haints, but adults can't. Little kids can see magic, and somehow when we become adults, we can't see magic. Yeah. And I always think about that in terms of young leaders. I say this all of the time, that we would have no positive action in the history of the world without young people wanting to see something different.
That's
Because old
facts.
folks get comfortable. It's like, no, I got to pay my mortgage. I got children to feed. I
got stuff to
cannot
do.
afford this. But kids still believe. And that's what I got, was he still believed. Gloria still believed. And that belief is really what enabled them to free them. He could see things other people couldn't see. And I know I don't want to skip to the end of the book, but that's how they freed themselves, was still believing and never losing sight of the unseen. And what is that quote? I know you're going to remember it. Faith is the
substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Yes, thank you. And that's scripture, right?
Yeah.
And that scripture is really playing out to me in this book. They had faith.
Yeah.
So many people went there and gave up, but Gloria would not stop, and Robbie would not stop.
Yes.
I just love that. I think that it's the magic of childhood, the magic of even a child in those situations, seeing it. The other thing was the protectiveness of the Haints, some of them.
Right. The protectiveness of the Hanks, but the protectiveness of the children toward each other.
Yes.
Like I love Redbone's and Robbie's tumultuous relationship, but also their love and affection for Blue. So another moment where my mouth was agape is we meet Blue when Robbie first gets to the Reformatory. Along with Redbone, and they're the first two to start, spark up a conversation with Robbie, and they meet in the kitchen, and they eat together and they talk together. Blue locks them in the freezer, right? I was so anxious. It's like, oh my God, they're going to the fun house. And we could talk about that part too. Again, language. You call like a whipping house the fun house. It's so weird. But to find out during this one-on-one that Robbie had with Haddock that the person that was so very real to Robbie had died in a fire 30 years ago in the person of Blue. And I'm just like, oh my God, Blue's a ghost.
Stayed to protect other children. Yeah. Stayed to lead to freedom. Stayed and was freed when Robbie was freed. Mm-hmm. When so many allegorical things, he was...
And foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. So many beautiful elements to that story. Because, here you have somebody in the harshest of circumstances, and there's still, the magic hasn't gone away yet, and he had not been changed completely. Now, had he stayed there a little longer, he probably would have lost that magic and lost faith in anything, but he didn't.
Can we also talk about... the physical settings that Tananarive paints that are very much characters in the book? Gracetown and Gloria's shack and Miss Hattie's home, Miss Anna's home is a character, right? The Reformatory, the campus, the dormitory is a character, and the Reformatory really, really messed me up because I was thinking about this, like what is the difference between a place like that we know those kinds of places existed in the U.S. than a concentration camp, than a plantation, a place of immeasurable and continuous suffering?
I have stopped calling places that I used to call plantations because in my mind, when I call it a plantation, there's some element of something human there. I call them forced labor camps because that's what they were. People were there under force to perform labor, and it was a camp. These are your things. And so I think if you look at a prison as a forced labor camp, if you look at what we call plantations as a forced labor camp, not all of them have the same intent, but they all force labor. And what they do is dehumanize the people within. Mm-hmm. So I think that Michael Harriot in our book also referred to it as a forced labor camp. And I've seen other people use that language. I watched a movie, and I'm really bad with names, so I'm not going to remember the name of this movie, but it was about this family in Germany who lived next to Auschwitz, I believe, and they're raising children right there, right next to it. And you could hear the buzzing of what was going on there. and yet you're raising kids and the mother's saying, oh, this is such a beautiful place to live, and they're living in this privilege and blinding themselves to
the boy in the striped pajamas?
No, it's the zone of interest. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
It was a great, great movie. If you really wanted to understand how people become horrible and how people can turn a blind eye to horror. So you could see people kind of hearing things and then pretending like they don't hear and having garden parties. It was really wild. But to me, that's what happened in the U.S. forced labor camps. Not the exact same thing because the intention was different, but let's not romanticize it as a plantation. You know, we have people getting married in forced labor camps in the United States, and we have people going on these tours, looking at and playing dress up. Yeah, but nobody goes to a forced labor camp in Germany and says, let's get married here. We need to understand terrible things happen here. People died here. People were whipped here. People were dehumanized here. Children are raped here. Families are split up here. And let's use language that befits that. And so when we're looking at these places where these children were incarcerated and required to produce labor to make money for some other folks. It's a forced labor camp. It is a chain gang. It is what you do along the way. And that happened, after slavery ended, that's what we did. We forced black people who stepped on the wrong side of the law for loitering, kicking somebody in the shin, running away from home into these situations. I think she did a great job of highlighting that.
Yeah. One of the questions that we wanted to ask, and we were really just talking about it in Hot Takes, is what parallels can be drawn from Gloria and Robbie's treatment as preteens and teenagers growing up in the South and the treatment of kids their ages today. One of the things that I often opine about, y'all, is, especially even here in the city of Detroit, that we are more likely to meet and come across a judge in the judicial system that will make a decision that will impact our freedom and our economic vitality than we are going to meet our city council person or mayor. Like we encounter these people and have way more access to these kinds of folks than the folks that we elect to serve on council and the mayor's office. But we very rarely know who these people are that have our freedom and our economic vitality in their hands. And what I'm seeing is the same thing for Gloria and Robbie. Here's this judge they ain't never heard of before who has the ability to grant freedom and take freedom away with the snap of the finger. And it really made me think about the things that we see today, right? We were talking to a judge who sits on the bench at 36th District about this at the Mocktails event. Like we need information and education about who these people are that sit in these seats.
And she's not just a judge, but she is now the president of the African American Judges Association of Michigan.
Yeah.
So she's got influence, and we're going to try to get her on Authentically Detroit because we did ask her some real tough questions. And then last Saturday, I did go to the opening of Rosa with liquor. I'm not going to say I drove all across town to drink liquor, but
you drove all the way to the west side.
I wanted to support the opening of this. And so there were a lot of attorneys in there, and a couple of them were running for judge. And they came up to me and they gave me their flyers running for judge. And I was about to say, so what are you running on? And they put it right there, all of their vision for justice and their experience promoting justice. I was like, you know what? I'm going to vote for you because you came to the table and you didn't tell me how great you were. You told me what you believed in and what you wanted to do. And that's really what I wanted to hear. So that was really heartening. And I, of course, always invoke Orlando Bailey because I know this has been something that you've wanted for so long for us to be able to monitor judicial appointments and judicial races.
Elections,
You know, in running for judge, everybody who goes to vote, I would say, I don't know what the number is, 75%, and this is a generous 75% of people who go to vote have no idea who the judges are on their ballot. But I think it's higher.
If
we're telling the truth, it's probably closer to 90. And you're just like, oh, that name sounds like it's a good person. Oh, that name is familiar.
I like this person's name.
If you are black, you are probably like, does that sound like a black name? Yes, it does. And I remember this one white guy had a black sounding name, and I saw him, and I was like, oh, this would have been so disappointing had I voted for him, because you're trying to find somebody. But, also this idea that black faces in high places doesn't really help us. We're really looking for black faces who are really about justice, and white faces who are about justice, and Asian faces who are about justice. I think justice has to be at the center of what we do in these courts. And in this case, there was a corrupt judge who actually gave a lighter sentence than he could have, because what they wanted was a death sentence, right? And this judge who was in bed kind of with these folks.
Yeah, he was.
Do you remember the judge in Pennsylvania?
Don't you go telling the McCormick's family business,
Yes.
is what he told Gloria.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you remember he was in bed, but not like all the way, or he would have sentenced him to indefinite, But there was a judge in Philadelphia who was actually making money by sentencing kids to a juvenile detention home. They paid him for every referral. And he had a boat, and the name of his boat, I don't remember the name of his boat. Remember, I'm bad with names, but the name of his boat was kind of a mockery of what he was doing judicially. So he got caught and locked up. But we know that this happens. It's horrible. That's one of the reasons that private prisons are so problematic, because there is a profit motive at putting people inside.
People in there.
And last thing I'm going to say about Florida, because this takes place in Florida. But in visiting Kevin's family in Florida, I have never heard of more family members in a single family running in and out of the prison system. The carceral system. It's crazy. It's like every single one of them, except for those who leave, are somewhere in there. And sometimes it's for something serious. Sometimes it's not. Florida places a premium on locking people up, like many states do. And then all of those fines and everything like that. So, yeah.
Let's discuss the need for characters to put on appearances in order to survive, because I found this really fascinating. Yes. For example, Gloria's character is sometimes accused of talking white for speaking properly. Meanwhile, other times she is shown to play dumb and speak more simply, depending on whom she is talking to. And so does Miss Lottie. Why does Gloria and Miss Lottie need to do this to accomplish their mission? What are other examples of situations in which characters had to play a role? Can you think of a time Black people in modern day adopt these false roles? We talk about it all the time. We call it code switching in 2024.
We do.
Yeah.
And some people code switch, and some people... Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning when Robbie is driving to the Reformatory. And
is being driven
to the Reformatory by Loman. What does Loman tell him to do? Be invisible. Don't stand out in any way. If you don't stand out, you'll be safe. Don't be smart. Don't be talented.
Don't be too
don't
dumb
be
either,
bad.
but...
Just don't stand out. And how many people have had to not stand out for survival? I think that was just really, really moving to me, because, we come from a people who were not allowed to read without, the possibility of death. And there were people who could read, you just couldn't let people know you could read. And there's always that, that threat of being seen as uppity. And so it's not something that is as obvious as that anymore, but people try to humble themselves, and act very humble. Demonstrating excessive humility is one way to gain acceptance in a lot of spaces. If people think you're cocky, a lot of people will not trust you as a Black person. Haven't you found that to be true?
Oh, absolutely.
I found, I had a classmate when I was in college. She says, "You think you're so smart. You try to be so smart."
I try to be.
And so my professor said, "How do you try to be smart? Either you are or you aren't." And he became one of my favorite professors because he defended me. But, I got reported to my school because some of my classmates found out my ACT score, and I was accused of either cheating or getting lucky. And my counselor wanted to know which it was because my grades weren't that great. That's okay, because I ended up getting all A's after that just to let her know I just wasn't trying, right? I had to let her know. But, yeah, I've experienced that. Have you experienced that, Orlando?
Not to the point where, I've been reported in an academic institution, but walking into a room confidently, speaking the way that I speak, and the truth that sometimes singes the conscience of folks who don't want to hear it. I have been the object of attack. I have been the object of trying to be silenced by corporations that have a lot more money than I do, that if I name it, you would know, because of a truth that I tell. And really this fearlessness that I have to tell the truth in spaces where decorum is unspoken but required. But I speak this truth in decorum.
But that's kind of a Detroit privilege, right?
Yeah.
Because there's probably some places you've been,
Yeah.
luxury retail stores, where you've walked in and all eyes are on you when you walk in that store.
Listen, I don't go to Fairlane to this day because of, I call it my first interaction with transactional racism. I was maybe 10 years old. And this was back when Fairlane had a Saks. Y'all remember when Fairlane had Saks?
Mm-hmm. It was fancy.
It was fancy back in the day. And so my aunt and I were going to Saks. She needed to get some makeup from the MAC counter inside of Saks. And I was trailing behind her. And the security guard stopped my aunt and said, kids are not allowed in here. So you have to come back later without this kid, or he has to sit like in the mall area and wait for you to do whatever it is you want to do, and then come out. And of course, I see kids in the Saks. And I remember being that young and not understanding the world the way that I understand it now, and not understanding racism the way I understood it now. I remember knowing in my core and in my soul that this was wrong and that it was racist. I didn't have the language. Right. And I remember being so offended and so heartbroken that I was perceived to be a bad child, because that's the language that I had, that I had resolved at 10 years old that I would never step foot in that place again. And I have not.
Yeah, good for you.
I have not.
There's no reason for you to do that. I just know that a lot of people will feel like if the police come and stop you, you've got to act a certain way. If you walk into a luxury store, you have to act like you belong. You have to be very conscious of how people are seeing you.
Let me tell you this story. I went out to karaoke in Farmington Hills, downtown Farmington. I don't know nothing about downtown Farmington. I know a little bit about some of the residential areas in Farmington Hills. At any rate, we were at this space and it was a brewery. Now, yeah, something like that. I think that's the name of the place.
Basement Brewery.
Basement Brewery. But here's the thing. Here's a running joke that my friends talk about me all the time. I can't say brewery correctly. I cannot get that word out. If I'm on the news and if it comes up, I'm like, Tati, you got to read that word. I can't read it because I can never say it correctly. So we have a great time. And then I'm leaving, and I don't know downtown Farmington. So I go down the parking lot, but the parking lot was one way, and I was going the opposite way in this parking lot. And so I get pulled over by this cop. And this cop pulls me over, and I'm trying to figure out what I did. He's like, you went the wrong way down the, he was like, where are you coming from? And I said, karaoke. He was like, where? And I said, I was at the brewery. And I started laughing. I said, I'm laughing. And I told him, I said, I'm laughing because this is a running joke with my friends. I cannot say brewery. And he didn't think it was funny because in his mind, I'm intoxicated, like all of these things.
But you do drink a lot, Orlando.
Oh my God, I drink so much.
So much.
Oh my God, I drink so much, and I did not have anything to drink that night. And so I became subject to, even though I told him that I hadn't had anything to drink, subject to all kinds of tests, right? All kinds of quizzes and things like that. And, it was funny for that split second. And then I had to realize where I was, who I was, the kind of car that I was driving. Because there was also this question of whose car is this? I'm like, it's my car, right? as you can see from the registration and the insurance, all of that. And I'm like, okay, I can very well be in danger. I need to tighten up. It's not a joke, right? And make sure I make it out of this interaction alive. And, it was funny for a second, and then it became really, really scary. And I think so many of us feel that fear every time the lights flicker in our back.
I went to high school in Farmington Hills.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still bearing the trauma of that.
Mercy.
But, growing up in Detroit, you have a certain level of privilege. I'm going to say this, right? So my first time down south, I went to this conference in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was crazy to me. Like one of the most busiest auction blocks for bringing enslaved Africans over to the United States has been turned into a marketplace. And they sell slavery memorabilia. And I'm like, okay, so mind you, this is the 1980s. So one of the ladies says, let me take you around. So he takes me into an antique store. And in the antique store, there are bills of lading for the sale of enslaved African people on people's walls. 1 winch, 2 pickaninnies, $3. And so I'm sitting here, and I'm from Detroit. And, Detroit, we don't know this, right? Because we're not raised in this. So I'm from Detroit. I'm in South Carolina. So I said to the store owner, let me ask you a question. He said, yes. Who buys this? He said, oh, lots of people buy this. Who would want this on their walls? And so I'm like going off on this man. And the poor guy who took me, he said, Donna, come here. We got to get out of here. He said, this is not a safe conversation. You can't do this. And so he introduces me to these senior women who live there. And they were like, no, girl, you can't do this, little girl, because it's like 20-something. You can't do this. And I had to learn how to be Black in the South. And my mother had always told me I couldn't go South because I didn't know how to act. And she was right, because I didn't know how to act. I was like, you let them, and I was, full of vim and vigor, not understanding. But here's the beauty of all of that. In the book, Black AF History, all I saw was Gullah people who looked oppressed. All I saw was a whole bunch of people living these lives that were caricatured for the wealth of other people and having to hide their shame. And then in reading Black AF History, Michael Harriot is Gullah. And he helped introduce us to the beauty of Gullah people and the pride they have and the independence I have. And I was like, you know what? You're a pretty uppity Detroiter. You didn't understand. These people were playing that role in that place and had their own life and well-being. And I think that's the other thing about the mask is sometimes if you're from Detroit, you don't understand the mask other people wear because you don't really have to wear them all that often. Not when you go to school, not when you go to court even. Very few places do you really have to put on the same kind of mask you do in other places. Mm-hmm. Is that your experience?
It is. I grew up in a very Black Detroit. I had Black school principals and teachers. And so I felt very affirmed in this city growing up.
Such that you would laugh at a police officer, right?
Such that, and that's been, and my dad, who had to have this conversation with me a lot in my 20s because, I grew up, I don't have one of those come from nothing stories. And so I grew up in a resource family. I grew up where my mother curated our educational experiences so that we can have the best possible education within the Detroit public school system, a system that she retired from. And so I did not ever think of myself as less than. And the conversation had to intensify when my parents purchased me my very first car because they were able to afford a car for their son, and it was a Monte Carlo Super Sport, black with a silver and red trim. That's
the blackest car.
You
in
feel
the history
me?
of Detroit, okay?
Let me tell you. And I don't tell my dad this. I used to let girls drive it all the time because they always wanted to drive my car.
I can't wait to see your dad.
Donna.
I'm snitching.
He don't listen to the show. But, coming up on the east side and specifically living off of Mack Avenue in East English Village, we had to contend with the Grosse Pointe police. And so I found myself getting pulled over all the time, not because I did anything wrong, but because of my car and the way that it looked and how sporty it was and how young I was. And I remember getting very flippant the first time I got pulled over, and I got in so much trouble with my parents for this, with the police officer who pulled me over for nothing. He was like, whose car is this? Well, it's my car, officer. My parents bought me this car. And he was like, do you know I can arrest you right now? Will you be able to make, I remember he was going off. Will you make bail? I said, absolutely. My parents will be able to post bail. You don't understand.
Do you know who
right. You don't know who I am. And this officer took pity on me and he let me go. And I went home and I told my parents, and I think I got set down for like a week. I couldn't drive my car for a week because I had to learn how to be black and drive.
Right.
I had to learn how to be black in the suburbs. I had to learn how to be black and communicate.
And you learned that from your parents, right?
I had to learn it from my folks.
So let's go back to Robbie.
Yeah, his folks were absent.
Robbie's parents were absent, and he didn't have anybody to teach him how to be black. That is, and it's a privilege to grow up in a city where you don't have to learn that as a child. And people don't always understand that privilege till they go away. But it is a privilege to grow up in a city where you don't have to learn that as a child. The problem is that it's still a thing. And there's so many people. And then it's a thing in ways that you don't understand. Because even within Detroit, you have caste. And there's some people who still get treated that way. When you grow up with relative privilege and you can speak the language and walk the walk and talk the talk and look the look, you get treated one way. When you grow up in Detroit and you dress differently and you speak differently and you resemble the culture of people in a different caste, you get treated another way. And I think that, I'm glad that you talked about growing up well-resourced, because, of course, I did as well. I went to Mercy High School, right? But I think a lot of times it makes people who grew up well-resourced blind to what's happening in our community, for people who are still afraid of going down the street. And we're going to take a full circle to these kids who are hanging out, and now there's a curfew at 9 p.m. and police have decided this is going to be a top criminal offense to have an illegal block party and to congregate in large groups. And it's going to be congregating in large groups. It's not going to be a block party, but if you and 10 of your friends are together and somebody calls the police or the police drive by, it's going to be looked at something questionable, and you're going to have to defend your right to be there, even right now in 2024, because in Detroit, caste is as important as race in determining who does what and who gets to do what. And I don't want us to look at the progress without looking at the harm some of our people are still in. And these people go into court in front of judges who presume that they are probably guilty because they look like thugs. And, they're thrown under the jail, and there's very little regard. They're probably going to be offered a plea bargain sentence of 6 months and expected to feel grateful for that. And when they come out, they will not be the same as when they went in. And that is 2024.
Well, we've been talking for a long time, and I want to make sure that we open it up for the folks who are here who may have something to contribute, a question to ask, a comment to infer. I love the book. I don't know if y'all could tell, but I absolutely loved it. It was a page turn. I really enjoyed this read. Keep in mind, the book club will go back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. So the next selection will be...
And maybe even poetry.
And poetry. So we'll figure out what the next selection is. But we got Sarah and Jay in the building. Y'all got anything to add, anything to say, anything you want to make a point about?
I bet you guys read a lot of books, don't you?
We try. Yeah, the stack is endless of what we should be reading. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I thought a couple things that I saw in it. What I liked is these were Black people freeing themselves, right?
Yeah.
The white characters, you mentioned Loman, they weren't heroic.
No.
There was no...
They were very basic. Miss Anna.
Yeah, Miss Anna.
She just gave $250, but that was it.
Was a drop in the bucket of what she owed that family.
Yeah.
And so it was either basic, as you say, like they couldn't go that extra mile, or they were the monster, right, in terms of the warden. So, that really stuck out. I think she made that obviously the point, that this was about Black people freeing themselves.
Yeah. And even, I love that. I love that because I think Gloria very early on realized that the system don't play fair, so she would have to operate outside of the system, right? And I wonder how many people feel like that today.
And but I think that because of her father not playing by the rules really and pushing, I think that she believed the system should play fair. And so she was also raised with that expectation. I want to go back to Black people freeing themselves, though, because that's really a theme in Black AF history, too, right? When you talk about the Civil War, and he talks about it's really the Black soldiers who won the Civil War, who freed themselves and had begun liberating themselves, emancipating themselves long before slavery was outlawed, the many ways that people sought freedom. So I think that's a really great understanding. Sarah, what about you? What is your understanding?
I'm still finishing the book.
Okay.
We got to get her a mic. You got to talk in the mic. Yeah.
Her writing, her storytelling. I'm also not, horror is not normally where I read, but I didn't think that this, even though there were some very hard things and scary things, I didn't think it presented as horror. Right. I thought she was really creative. Oh, when did you know that Blue was dead, right?
Yeah.
So I thought
that was so good. That's what I'm saying.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
That's okay.
No, we're giving
That's all right.
stuff away.
We're giving away the story,
Yeah.
Stringing that out, learning that later in the book, I thought that was really creative. I thought the power that she gave people that were no longer walking this life was powerful.
Yeah.
That just because, and not just because, but even though someone had taken their life here, that they still had life to give.
Absolutely. And, I think also Mama died of cancer, right? But she was still there. At pivotal times, she was still there. She couldn't give the kind of support and lessons, but she never really left them. And I had this revelation not long ago. I lost my mother in 2022, and I had this revelation that she's still here. And she's inside of me. And that was something that a lot of people always say, well, she's in you now. But I had a feeling of it. I could feel it physically, my mother inside of me, and it really gave me peace. And so I wish I could see her and listen to her words, but the peace of just knowing she's here, I could relate to that with Robbie. Did you have a similar understanding of these characters giving peace and also wisdom and imparting other great things?
Yeah, Mama came to provide comfort.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. The other thing too, and I know we got to wrap up, that I want to make mention is the last point in our rundown about the role of music in the liberation of our minds, even if for a short period of time, but also in the liberation of our bodies. I think Miss Hamilton is a dynamic character who comes to the Reformatory to teach band and provides an outlet for Redbone and Robbie to play music and to be adorned and lauded for their talent. I mean, we see that Robbie is a prodigy, and Miss Hamilton, makes mention of that. And music cannot be divorced from our struggles toward liberation. Music was always a through line.
Oh, I love music.
Yeah.
I love music. I've always loved music. I used to play music, piano, clarinet, and flute. And loved music growing up. It was like books. But I think that really music connecting people to each other. And I thought that her story was really sad, though. Yeah. With her brother.
Yeah.
And I thought, look at these two opposite people, and imagine that
her
being
brother,
your brother.
And then the other character, Boone. Just like playing that role of overseer.
Yeah. And they weren't heroic either, right?
Yeah.
They were the
reminded
opposite.
me of the Sam Jackson character
in
Django.
Django.
Yeah. Yes.
Or the dude in Life with Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy. I forget his name, but
Uncle Ruckus.
Right. Legit.
Yeah, he was. They played this horrible role, and it came from a place of self-hate. You kind of see itself playing itself out in real life right now with characters like Clarence Thomas, who
And the dude who's vying for the VP nomination from Donald Trump.
Oh, my goodness.
My
the
God.
idiot.
Tim
yes.
Scott.
Tim Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Tim Scott, but is another black dude.
Oh, yeah. I know who you're talking about.
I can't think of his name.
A couple of them. Hey,
Yeah.
let me be your black person. Is it vice presidency a black job? I don't know. Kamala Harris has one, so maybe we need another one.
Oh, man. Okay, we got to wrap up. Do we have any final thoughts about this amazing piece of art?
No, I just want, the thing about it is people watch old movies, right? And I think we should read old books too, because I really want people to read her Immortal series. I love Tananarive Due. I think she's great. And I hope that people begin to appreciate some of these lesser known authors who have done dramatically wonderful things. I follow her on Twitter, so we're friends now. So I just want to thank her for always doing such a great job of really raising relevant issues and helping connect us to our past.
All right. If you have topics or books that you want to discuss on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Don't forget to join us at the African World Festival this Friday, July 12th, for a live podcast at 7 p.m. All right, Donna, it's time for shout-outs. You have any?
I do.
Okay.
I want to shout out Idra Goudet. I think she is doing the Lord's work. And she is, because food, everybody loves food, right?
In the business of food.
And she's in the business of food. And the way that she builds capacity, and she always finds herself in spaces where she lifts other people, is something commendable. I really loved her event yesterday, doing that event with her. But what I really loved was when she came in and had to school me for a minute, I was like, this woman knows her stuff.
She knows it.
And it was really an opportunity for her to just show how brilliant she is. Because
And for us to learn.
For us to learn, but her brilliance, she doesn't always express herself as brilliant. She always smiles and does nice things and cooks really good food. But she came in fierce and she was like, let me tell you something about the food business. I was like, girl, what? So shout out to Idra.
And shout out to WE and Marcus Relaford.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, WE, I want a mushroom burger.
Okay. Right. I want to be her friend.
Right.
I mean, geez, just amazing. I would like to shout out Jay and Sarah for allowing us to host the book club here at Next Chapter Books. It feels so good to be home on the east side. This is the neighborhood I grew up in. This is the neighborhood that would be my forever home. And it's so cool to have a space like this. I only wish that it had been here when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But we had Borders in Grosse Pointe on Kirchville, so that's where I hung out at. But
I think one of the best things that happened with Borders going down is neighborhood bookstores coming up, because this feels so much personal.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring my granddaughter here and one day, because this is just the kind of atmosphere that children should be in.
Yes.
So this is a wonderful, wonderful labor of love.
And it's the kind of atmosphere that I try to spur in my home. If you come to my home, there are books everywhere on purpose.
Yes. Mine, there's books everywhere, not on purpose. Kevin has to try to organize them. No, I'm just joking. Of course, on purpose. And I really want to shout out Next Chapter Books. And please come check the store out. Yeah. Please come support neighborhood businesses. Detroit businesses need your support.
Yeah.
Detroit bookstores are going up against so much competition online, but it's those physical bookstores that are really helping to hold down our community. So really proud of this store.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.